you. So, just remind we do anybody that's on Facebook, if you please mute yourself and also hit your video, because if you remember only one CNN person, what you're doing at home, everyone else can see what you're doing at home. So I would recommend just to stop those things. So Tom, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker.
Okay. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, how many of you were here last month at your policy?
Yes.
Okay, what did you think of it?
Oh, yeah, great stuff.
Well, guess what? I have him coming back next year. So I got it booked. So I want to introduce Jason. I met him several years ago at an encampment, and he was doing a medical officer. And I was so impressed with the knowledge that he had that I asked him if he would be willing to speak to our round table. He drove from New Jersey, so he had about a 2-hour drive, and he's going to drive back again, but I'm not going to waste any more time. I'd like us to give Jason Dilts a nice warm welcome. All yours.
Shut that one up.
Okay.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Oh, yeah.
We'll get that squared away first. Yes, so thank you for having me. My name is Jason Dilts, Civil War reenactor, living historian, just under 10 years now. I do 2 impressions. My favorite is a hospital ambulance or a ambulance corps sergeant. And the reason that one is my favorite is I am a retired EMT. Spent many years working as an EMT. And when I started getting into the Civil War, bringing those 2 together was like the pinnacle of my EMS career. So, along with the ambulance corps sergeant, I also do a impression of a medical inspector. So I hold the rank of lieutenant colonel, and the medical inspectors are a asset of the medical department that's really not talked about. But what we did, and we'll get into it a little bit in our presentation, inspect general hospitals, field hospitals, ambulance corps transportation, camps, everything that had to do with the health and safety and sanitation of our Army is what we did and what we inspected as a medical inspector. So that's what I do. I enjoy it quite well. Three groups I work with, 2 of them are primary reenactment groups, and the 1 is a living history group. So I do a wide array of different programs. But let me just jump into this. I've called this overcoming obstacles because that's what we had to do as the medical department. Okay, we had to overcome the obstacles to get the things that we needed to get done. The obstacles are absolutely huge in this endeavor that the medical department tried to do.
Right now, is it?
There we go. So this program, we're going to explore the growth of the medical service in direct relation to the War of the Rebellion and the need for improvements. It will review the achievements, the growth of the service, and look at the service based on documented statistics. Okay, I love numbers, so you'll see a lot of numbers in here. So we go right into it. July 27, 1775. The Continental Congress forms the Army Hospital. Okay, so this is just after the Revolutionary War, or kind of during the end of it. But the problem is the hospital was only in operation in the time of war. Okay, so once the war was ended, they closed down the medical service. As far as a functional field hospital type system. Okay. Fast forward to 1818, a bill was finally passed that gave the U.S. Army a permanent medical service. So from this point forward, in the United States Army, you will see a permanent medical service. And that was under the direction of the first Surgeon General. Okay, jump forward 1821, this is what our Army medical service looked like. We had the Surgeon General, we had 8 surgeons, which were called regimental surgeons. We'll see how that's kind of confusing here in a minute. We had 45 assistant surgeons.
Not sure what's going on with that, yeah.
We had 45 assistant surgeons, which were post surgeons. And they would use contract surgeons if they had to. And we'll go over contract surgeons.
Right. Is that a rooster on the top of that ship?
Yes, it is.
And what's the significance of that? The doctor's only working in the daytime or?
It goes back to, no, if I remember correctly, and let's hope this is the one question that I can't bring up on my mind quick enough. Yeah, I don't want to give you the wrong information, okay? But what we will do, we'll talk afterwards, I'll get your email, and I'll get that information out of you. There is actually, if you log on to the Army Medical Museum, they have a full YouTube video on every point of this evidence.
Oh, okay.
I should have put the link in here, but that was my fault. But we can fix that. That's great. Okay. So we see where our medical department stands. Onset of the wards, this is the onset. Something over there.
I know, that's why I say maybe back away.
So the onset of the Civil War, okay? The medical department was set up to treat a peacetime army prior to the Civil War, okay? These surgeons were assigned to an army post, not a unit. They weren't assigned to a regiment or a battalion. They were assigned to an army post. And at this point in history, there were about 89 army posts spread out through the country. Places like Fort Riley, Leavenworth, Kansas. There were no pre-plans within the medical department for war. You had an entire medical department that had no pre-plans should the country engage in war. Okay? There was a large failure of the medical department to learn from previous wars. Because if we had learned from previous wars, we would not have shut down our medical service in between wars. We would have kept things active, but we shut that down. There's no supplies set aside should the country engage in war. Inadequate medical staffing, and we'll go over where we started the beginning of the Civil War as far as medical staffing numbers here in just a minute. And Congress was unwilling or unable, depending on which report you read, to increase the medical staffing. It wasn't important to them. We had problems getting the sick to the hospitals. No organized ambulance corps at this point in history. We have a lack of disease prevention. At this point in history, we are not aware of human theory. Okay. And the command staff, the Surgeon General at the time was very conservative. He wouldn't even buy an overabundance of books for the medical staff. If it was not absolutely required, he would not approve it. Very, very conservative, very much like the way the numbers of expenditures was low, made the department look good. And as late as 1860, 50% of those seeking commission in the medical department of the United States Army still failed the examination to receive a commission. So we're not ready for this. We are nowhere near ready for the onset of the Civil War. So here's where we actually started. Okay. The U.S. Army Medical Department consists of one Surgeon General, 30 surgeons, 84 assistant surgeons, and 114 personnel in the so that's a total of 114 personnel in the medical department. Okay, and they're responsible for 1,117 commissioned officers and 11,907 enlisted men. How did they do it? Well, they didn't. They did the best they could. Okay. They were accustomed to handling the health problems of small and relatively isolated posts. Old-time Army surgeons had never been called upon to develop plans for evacuating, hospitalizing, or caring for the vast numbers of wounded and sick, or for preventing disease in camps with populations of thousands. Who wants to be sick at this point in time in history? If you're in the Army, not me. Okay, but let's make it worse. Of that 114, 24 resigned. We all know where they went. They went south of Mason's days. 3 were dismissed from service. So now we're down to 88. This is 88 medical staff in the United States Army Medical Department just prior to the Civil War. Not a good number. So those 88, they were surgeons and assistant surgeons. We have another medical staff member that is active at this point in time in history, and that is our hospital stewards. So our hospital stewards, they were selected and appointed mostly by their command staff, their commanding officers, and then they would be appointed by the Secretary of War to be a hospital steward in the Army. They are the lowest rank in medical service. Okay, that would often be found in the forward aid station and within.
I'm not sure going that Mike.
They would often be found in the forward aid station, and they would help with surgeries and wound care. In general hospitals, they would supervise the cooks, nursing staff, and as well as function as hospital administrators. So these guys were a combination of our modern day RNs, patient care techs, and administrators. And they did the dental work. We know what dental work consisted of back then. You either dealt with the pain or we took it out. So let's make the hospital stewards do that thing. So here we are, April 12th, 1861, Fort Sumter. We know that. And our president decides to call for 75,000 men. Okay. 4 regiments from New Jersey. Got to throw that in there. So now we've called for soldiers. We've also decided that now we need to call for medical staff. So General Order number 15, May 4th, 1861, is our first orders. Is a plan of the organization of the volunteer forces in the service of the United States. Okay. So this number here, this 39 is incorrect. That should be 93. I didn't catch that before I sent it off to you. So of that 75,000 men, roughly 93 regiments, each of those regiments was to have an assistant surgeon and 1 hospital steward. And then each cavalry regiment was to have 1 assistant surgeon. And now this is volunteer forces. These assistant surgeons would muster in with these regiments. Most of them would be the hometown doctors from where the regiment came from. Okay. So that's our first order that gives us medical staff with our volunteers. Okay. And this is the first order for the regular army. We decide we need a hospital steward for each battalion of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. This is regular army. Okay. I threw that in there one time in the program. We had to refresh ourselves. But I did that in there. But let the confusion begin, because this is where it started. So the last 2 orders we talked about was 1 for volunteer and 1 for regular. And this would be confusion for the medical department for the entire length of the war. So our regular army surgeons, regular army trained soldiers. Okay, they had to pass an exam to receive a commission as a surgeon from the War Department. They were appointed by the Board of Medical Directors. So you have qualified doctors screening your regular army surgeons to make sure that they are going to fit the bill. Okay, a lot of those surgeons have extensive training, including overseas. A lot of them would train in Scotland and England and France. In comparison to our volunteer army surgeons, very, very little, if any, army training. They did not have the knowledge on army paperwork, army protocol. So that put them behind. The entrance exams often lack quality. Our regular army, we had a board of medical directors that would administer the exam. Very hard exam. When we first started by the 1860s, 50% of the army was still, or surgeons that were seeking commission still failed. The entrance exams for the volunteer surgeons were under the direction of the governor of the state that was raising the regiment. Do you think their quality was high? Some were, yes, some were very high. Some were mediocre. So you had these volunteer army surgeons passing an exam that had a wide range of knowledge and abilities as compared to the regular army surgeons. Okay, the appointments were by the governors. There were governors that appointed surgeons that had never even been to medical school. They were usually small town doctors They were not used to dealing with Army life and injuries from battles. Some of these small town doctors had never done an amputation till they were post their first battle. So now we're jumping to May 14th. We're still in the first year of war. The medical department, regular Army, says we need more surgeons in the regular Army. So they're going to add 10 surgeons and 20 assistant surgeons. Okay, and these surgeons will be promoted according to the existing laws and regulations from the senior assistant surgeons, and the assistant surgeons will be appointed from civilian life after having passed the examination by the board of the medical department. So they're sticking to their guns. If you want to be a regular Army surgeon, you're going to have to pass this test. So here we come on to May. And this order here, plan of the organization of the volunteer forces. You'll see there, 1 surgeon per regiment. Remember what we did last time? We appointed assistant surgeon. Now we're putting surgeons out there. This is the first time you're going to see surgeons in volunteers in the United States Army. And then we have 1 assistant surgeon per regiment. Okay, so in less than 1 month, we had gone from assigning an assistant surgeon to a surgeon. We've realized in just 1 month. And the reason we realized this was not because of Fort Sumter. We haven't even started major battles. We had brought thousands of guys together and put them in a camp. So what happened? Everybody's sick. Everybody's got this, that. They came from Massachusetts, and now they're down here, south of Mason-Dixon or south of Washington, and they don't have community and stuff that's going on down there. They'd never been 20, 30 miles from the homestead. So these soldiers were getting sick. So you're going to see an increase here. But this will be the first time you're going to see a surgeon in the volunteer force. And then we also, of course, add more hospital stewards. We're going to move on from these orders, but I want to make a point here. You can see how quickly we're going. We're just building this medical staff. Very quickly, we'll realize how ill-prepared we are for this. And the only way that we can really fight this is put medical staff out there. And let's figure out how to make this work for the tasks that we have at hand. So, June 10th, 1861, Dorothea Dix. We have anybody that studies her, we know her story. She was appointed superintendent of nurses for the Union Army. She's tasked with establishing a volunteer nurse corps, and it's estimated 3,000 to 5,000 nurses volunteer. We all know that number is much higher. We'll never know the true number. And there's many that are not even done. Okay. But this will be the first time that you're going to see an Army sanctioned nurse corps established under her superintendence. So now we actually have surgeons, we have assistant surgeons, we have hospital stewards, we have nurses. You can see how our response is going here. You know, the obstacles that we want to overcome is taking care of these soldiers. And this is how we're going to do it. So our nurses, no military rank, 35 to 50 years of age. good character and health, plain and body features, obedient to rules, 40 cents per day. And they were not always appreciated by the surgeons and the other medical staff in the posts where they were placed. Okay? They would ultimately prove themselves to be very effective at doing their nursing duties and many other things. So they were definitely an asset. Putting them out there, organizing the nurse corps. And there's many stories if you're into the nursing, Sisters of Charity. A lot of neat stuff with the nurses. But this will be the first time you're going to see an Army organized nurse.
But no Dolly Partners, right?
No, plain and features. What happens when you get a bunch of young men together, you gotta have plain and features. So first we'll run. Okay. We all know the story of first we'll run. The first large land battle. And this is where we stand as the medical department. Okay. The quartermaster department was in charge of erecting the equipment of military hospitals and transportation of the sick and wounded. And the subsistence department was in charge of supplies. Can we see where it's going?
Yeah.
Not very far.
Surgeons, because we had switched over from having post surgeons to now our surgeons are with a veteran. There were surgeons that refused to accept wounded in his mental hospital because it was not part of that veteran. Try that today and see how far it goes. Total lack of ambulances. Ambulance corps at this point in time was Teamsters and whatever they could find to transport a soldier. Not one single soldier is documented in arriving in Washington, D.C. in a ambulance. Lack of medical supplies on the field. Well, we didn't prepare any, so there would be a lack of supply. So this one here, again, now we're post the first large battle of the Civil War. Okay, well, what's important about this one? It's not just the general order. This is an act of Congress. So now Congress is actually getting involved, and they're saying each regiment of infantry, whether volunteer or regular army, is going to have one surgeon, assistant surgeon, and hospital steward. Bringing out the big guns, getting the Congress involved. And then April 19th is the biggest general order that would come out for the medical department. Act to reorganize and increase the efficiency of the medical department of the Army. Okay, add into the regular Army 10 surgeons, 10 assistant surgeons, 20 medical cadets. When we heard of those guys. Hospital stewards, as many as the Surgeon General considers necessary for service. That's a pretty blank check, right? We have one assistant surgeon general, one medical inspector general, one medical inspector of general hospitals, 8 medical inspectors, and 8 medical purveyors. This here is the #1 largest increase in the medical staff for the Civil War. And it lined us up to really do a lot of things. A medical inspector general is exactly what it says. He's the general, the high commander of the medical inspectors of the general hospitals. We're gonna go into detail on each of these in a little bit. So now you have the medical inspectors, of course, medical purveyors. The medical purveyors were put into place because they would take the control of supplies away from the other departments of the army. All our supplies to the medical department are now under the control of the medical department. Along with all our ambulances, our tents, and we're gonna go into some of that there in just a minute. Along with our other additions, we're going to put storekeepers who are going to assist the medical purveyors, and they are not to exceed 6. And we're gonna put one chaplain in each permanent hospital. So our medical cadets, they would act as dressers in general hospitals, ambulance attendants in the field. They would rank as West Point military cadets. The number should not exceed 50 in the service. And they should be young men of medical education with 1 course of lectures at college. So medical college in this time period consisted of 1 course of lectures, usually about 9 months. That you would have a time period in between that and your second course of lectures, which was a repeat of the first course. And then after you did both courses of lectures, you would preset for a short time, and then you would be able to practice as a medical doctor. And it was all up to the surgeon that precepted with to say that you were qualified to be a medical doctor. At this point in time, there is no regulations on what is needed to be called a doctor. So still a lot of give and leeway in this. But a lot of those medical cadets would go on and be surgeons. They would complete their second course of lectures and move up through the ranks. They would be between the ages of 18 and 23. They would enlist for 1 year. They would pass an examination to be called a medical cadet in the Army. And they were given 1 ration per day. No allowance for equipment or accommodation. We'll give you 1 meal, but I don't know where you're sleeping. So the Inspector General, that's exactly what it is. He's the commanding officer of the medical inspectors. Our Inspector General of Hospitals, he was responsible for commanding the inspectors of the general hospitals. So at this point in the war, we had started establishing general hospitals, and the difference between the general hospital and any other field or any other hospital in the Army was the general hospital paid no difference to rank, unit. If you needed to go to a general hospital, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you were a lieutenant colonel or you were a private. It didn't matter to the nursing and the hospital and medical staff. Okay, field hospitals, brigade hospitals, division hospitals, however they may be set up. That's what they did. They cared for the soldiers of their respective unit. Okay, And then once you got up to the general hospitals, these were usually brick and mortar. Letterman was the largest tent general hospital established during the Civil War, so they weren't always brick and mortar. But they were your larger hospitals that paid no regard to your rank or your unit if you were sent to a general hospital. 204 general hospitals would be in service by the end of the Civil War. Any idea where we started? Zero. The Army had what they considered 0 general hospitals in service prior to the American Civil War. They had post hospitals. But as far as a general hospital, a specific purpose built hospital prior to the Civil War, none. These hospitals were our pavilion style hospital, specifically built to be hospitals with proper heating, proper ventilation, proper sanitation. Some of them were built in a circle, like spokes coming off on the wheel. Some of them were more regimented with a long pavilion down the center with pavilions going out to the side. So our inspector generals would be inspecting these hospitals that were specifically built. Anybody have an idea where that stuff is hanging in the hospital there?
Evergreen stuff, sort of like Christmas wreaths and.
Yeah, but it's not Christmas.
Yeah, I know.
They would hang that stuff up to help with the smell.
Yeah, the odors.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people say, why are all pictures decorated like it's Christmas? It's always Christmas. No. So your medical inspectors, they're inspecting for cleanliness, proper food preparation, use of sinks, seeing that all equipment is properly cared for and replaced when needed. And all deficiencies would be reported to the commanding officer. Medical inspectors was a big drive from the sanitary commission. They were directly related to the sanitary commission pushing for an increase in sanitary conditions for our soldiers. Okay, this was the way that they could put people out there to make sure that the things were being done. So basically, the sanitary commission would get off the Surgeon General back. But so our medical purveyors, they were responsible for the selection and purchase of hospital medical supplies. The Army would have a regulation on all the medical supplies. There were different manufacturers that would manufacture supplies. It was up to the medical purveyors to see that those regulations were being met. And then we could purchase that equipment from those manufacturers. So they would ensure the quality. They would also run the purveying departments in the major cities. And what the purveying department was a storage warehouse. Where they would house supplies that would in turn then be divided up and sent out to the units within the Army. And just a couple of numbers, medical purveyor Richard Satterley is responsible for requesting the following equipment during the war. 1,150 Trifini were post-mortem cases. Trifini is drilling into the skull to relieve intracranial pressure. 12,700 minor surgery cases and pocket cases. That's a lot of surgery. 65,000 tourniquets. You look all across the board, you'll see those numbers repeated over and over and over. So our storekeepers who worked in conjunction with our medical purveyors, not to exceed 6 in number, no actual military rank, just a worker. Between the ages of 25 and 40, a sufficient physical ability and good moral character. And they must pass an exam with good English, materia medica, and understanding of the business of being a storekeeper. They must provide a $40,000 bond prior to appointment. Who came up with that? But exactly. I'm still doing some research on that. That is in a primary source. That's it. They would receive and issue and store all medical supplies. Our storage.
Hey, Jason, you want to just turn this off and use this one?
So our hospitals. Chaplains. So the chaplains that we would assign to our post hospitals, one chaplain for each permanent general hospital. They would be paid the same as a regular regimental chaplain. They were subject to the rules prescribed for all commissioned military officers. And the chaplains would often perform work outside of their role as a spiritual provider. They would help dress wounds, write letters for those that could not, and they actually would help with the establishment of field hospitals and move soldiers to and from the field hospital. So they kind of jumped in wherever they felt the need outside of their spiritual work. But this was a medical department position, a chaplain in a general hospital. So General Order 147, which is my absolute favorite order, it was written by Dr. Letterman and endorsed by General McClellan, and it was first instituted in the Army of the Potomac. It was our first organized ambulance corps in the United States Army. They would have their own commanding officers on every level of the Army. A regiment would have a sergeant, and then there would be a lieutenant, all the way up to a captain. Would be the commanding officer of an ambulance corps for a brigade. Within this order, it outlined how many ambulances were assigned to a regiment, how many stretcher bearers were on those ambulances, how they were to move the wounded with the stretcher, how they were to load and unload the ambulance, all the way down to signal flags that they would put out to direct them to the forward aid stations and then back to field hospitals and on to general hospitals or wherever they establish more permanent hospitals. They would move directly behind the engaged soldiers. And this regulation was finally passed by Congress in 1864. So it started out just like our other regulations, was a general order, but eventually it would be an act of Congress and the first organized ambulance. 57 New York. That's actually an ambulance corps drill. I looked at that photo for a long time until I actually learned that it was a drill. It's kind of disappointed. But you can see they're moving a soldier on the stretcher there, loading them into our purpose-built ambulances. This is a picture of the ambulance shop down in Washington, D.C. when we started building specific purpose-built ambulances for our Army ambulance corps. We would start putting springs in our ambulances, try to make the ride a little bit better. There were many different manufacturers, or not manufacturers, designs of ambulances. We had two-wheel ambulance cars. We had four-wheel light ambulances. We had four-wheel heavy ambulances. You know, the Rucker, the Coolidge Medical Car. That's a whole nother topic in itself. But we finally realized we have to figure out how we're going to get our injured taken care of and off the field. So this is what we did. We organized an ambulance corps. We started building ambulances specifically for that purpose. And while we're at it, just throw some hospital trains in there too. So in the beginning of the war, the medical department would take what they could when it came to hospital trains. By this point in the war, we had specific purpose-built hospital trains. The locomotives, the coal cars would all be labeled hospital trains. Any of the lanterns would have red filters on, designate them as a hospital train. And we started building the inside of our train cars so that we could put the stretchers right into the train car from the ambulance without moving a soldier from one bed to another or from one stretcher to the bed. And the way that we did that was right here where these the side of the stretcher would hang on these posts. We would hang them with large rubber bands. So that stretcher was now able to move a little bit with that train car as it's traveling down the tracks. So we're starting to really think about what we need to do to take care of our soldiers. Especially with this one here. We have ambulances and trains and why not ships? Same thing. We started with commandeering ships. By this point in the war, we started outfitting the ships to be hospital ships. They would have surgical suites on them. They would have sinks. They would have cooking facilities. They would have convalescing rooms, large rooms where the soldiers could get out of bed and move about while being transported. A lot of the hospital ships were used on the Trans-Pacific, and between Washington, D.C. and like the Peninsula, Aquia Atlantic, and things like that, is where you would see the hospital ships. They're not moving small amounts of people. Some of these ships would hold up of 1,000 or 2,000 guys. So. One surgeon. Oh, wait, that's number 6. Now we go to 2 assistant surgeons. And 1 hospital steward. And that would be the last large change in what was to be assigned to a volunteer Army regiment before the war ended. So we started with 1 assistant surgeon, 1 hospital steward. Now we're at 1 surgeon, 2 assistant surgeons, and a hospital steward. And even those 4 men were sometimes not enough to take care of what needed to be taken care of for a regiment. Antietam. We're all familiar with Antietam. The reason Antietam plays in this, not because it was a Civil War battle, but it was the first battle with a lot more changes in effect. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. So for Antietam, Dr. Letterman changed the medical supply system. Up until this point, each unit was issued their medical supplies for 3 months. So every 3 months, they would get resupplied. That wasn't working. So it was changed to all supplies would be assigned by the brigade surgeon as needed. So the brigade surgeons had the unlimited supply, and all the regimental surgeons would apply to the brigade surgeon to get the supplies when they needed. Okay, this was specific to the Army of the Potomac under Dr. Letterman, but it proved very effective. Okay, you're not lugging around 3 months worth of supplies. You know, and if you ran out of something, it was easy, I shouldn't say easy, it was logical to go to your brigade surgeon and try to get a requisition filled than it was when it was 3 months of service. Or every 3 months you were issued your supplies. This change would last in the Army of the Potomac Medical Department to the end of the war because it was effective. The field hospital organization was also changed. Okay. Prior to the Antietam, all regimental field hospitals operated independently. So you could have as many regiments as you wanted, and they each had their own field hospital. Which came down to the regimental staff for that field hospital. If one regiment received more casualties or had more work than they could handle, who suffered? The soldiers. Because they couldn't get anybody else. Because their regimental hospitals set up there and theirs was over there. Very ineffective. So what we did was we started to organize the hospitals on a division level. Every regiment in that division would get together and establish a division hospital. So all of the medical staff for the regiments would get together, and this is what they would have to decide. Who was going to be the surgeon in charge? Who was going to be the assistant surgeon to provide food and shelter? Who was going to be the assistant surgeon to keep records? There would be 3 surgeons that would be the operators. They're the ones doing the operations, the amputation, removals, etc. And there would be 3 medical officers as assistants for those operators. The hospitals and stewards, the hospital stewards and nurses would carry on with their functions. But all this staff would get together one field hospital. So everybody was working together, everybody pulled their supplies together, and it proved effective. And this would continue to the end of the war in the Army of the Potomac. You would continue to see the medical department putting surgeons out in the field with specific units, like the engineers, throughout the war. They would assign surgeons to the signal corps, to the engineers, to the artillery, and things like that, as they realized that if they stretched the medical department too much farther, we were going to start going backwards. So they would continue assigning surgeons to the specialized departments throughout the war. Still increasing as we go along. April 28, 1863, the Invalid Corps was organized, and it was established to allow soldiers to continue to serve after being deemed unfit for field service. 60,000 men would serve in this corps. There would be 24 regiments in all. They escorted prisoners and dignitaries and guarded railroads, patrol duties, bands, but they also served as hospital attendants. So this was one way that they could keep soldiers involved in serving if they could not fulfill the service of their previous enlistment. Veteran Reserve Corps is the new name for the Invalid Corps. This would be changed in 1864. They had a lot of soldiers that didn't want to be in the Invalid Corps. So the Veteran Reserve Corps was the new home for the Invalid Corps. And that's the 10th Reserve Band. A lot of the bands would do service in the hospitals, keeping the mood light, providing entertainment for the convalescent soldiers. Fredericksburg, the next big battle in our timeline here. And then Gettysburg. So Gettysburg, the first large-scale battle, and I'm going to sink this down directly to the Army of the Potomac, where everything was in place. Field hospital supply, the field hospital, ambulance corps, everything that Dr. Letterman had tried to put in place for his medical department was in service operating for the Battle of Gettysburg. And if we look at some of the information that comes out of the Gettysburg campaign, we see many division hospitals set up. Okay, you even see the Spangler Corps Hospital, which was basically just 3 divisions in one place, so they called it a Corps Hospital. The ambulance corps organized, set up, transporting soldiers. All injured Union soldiers within the lines were off the battlefield in 24 hours. Big difference from our first full run.
Just take it to-
So these numbers here are from the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. As far as killed, wounded, and missing, this number here is what the American Battlefield Trust says. And I'm glad you brought that up because it proves one point that even after all this time, our numbers are just rising and rising and rising because, we're learning new things. Logically thinking and scientifically thinking about what actually happened there. But so these are the numbers that are reported in our medical documents. This is what they're saying nowadays. So the medical staff by the end of the war. Surgeon General, Assistant Surgeon General, Inspector General, 60 medical inspectors, 170 surgeons and assistant surgeons, regular Army. Okay, volunteer brigade surgeons, 547 surgeons and assistant surgeons. But here is the backbone of the medical department. 2,109 surgeons, 3,882 assistant surgeons in your volunteer medical staff. Contract surgeons, throughout the entire history of the Army Medical Department, they would employ contract surgeons. And they did so during the American Civil War. They were always at general hospitals. Very rarely did you ever see them on the field. And they were exactly what it said. They were surgeons or doctors that were employed via a contract for the American Army. 85 surgeons and 5,532. Like I said, most of these, or almost all of these, contract surgeons were in your general hospitals, your brick and mortars, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, etc. How about that number? 12,344. Much better than our 88. I think we responded pretty well. We probably could have doubled that number. It's still not as been effective as it could, but that's where we ended up. So the casualties in the medical department. 32 surgeons were killed. 9 of them by accident. 83 were wounded, and of those wounded, 10 would die. 4 died in prison. 7 died of yellow fever. 3 of cholera. And 271 died of other diseases, which were incidental to camp life or exposure in the field. Well, let's think about this. These numbers are low. They're very low. Because these surgeons would carry these diseases with them the rest of their life, and they would probably die at a younger age as compared to if they were not surgeons before. But this is what's documented by the medical department after the war. I think those numbers are much higher. So this is total numbers. Look at that number. Cases of wounded and disease. Again, I think that number is low. There's a lot of stuff that may not be reported. But just thinking of that number alone. I mean, you could take that 6 and make it a 3, and it'd still be a big number. This is how much money we spent. I don't even want to think of what some of the numbers are in today's market. But there were records kept ending fiscal year, June 30th each year. The Surgeon General's office did keep financial records for everything that was spent on the medical department.
Times 31, Jason. No, I researched it. That's the amount that is
Yeah.
increased to about 31 times those numbers. And
I believe
they're huge.
Yeah. So not everything was good in the medical service. We did have surgeons that were court-martialed. Thank God that the lowest number of court-martials was for the care of soldiers. But there were soldiers that were court-martialed for improper care of soldiers, misuse of money, misuse of food, being able. What they should have done on earth. Alcohol and rules of authority. But misuse of food. A lot of the surgeons got themselves caught up because they would indulge themselves in things that were for the sick and or injured. And that's stealing, according to the Army. So. One of the good things that we did, along with everything else, was our good friend here, Dr. Hammond, who was Surgeon General for a short time. He issued Surgeon General's Order Circular Number 2 to start the collection for the Army Medical Museum. So the museum was constructed for the purpose of illustrating the injuries and disease that produced death or disability during the war, and thus supporting materials for precise methods of study. And his surgeons were directed to diligently collect and forward to the office of the Surgeon General all specimens of morbid anatomy, surgical or medical, which may be regarded as valuable, together with projectiles, foreign bodies removed, and such other matter as may prove of interest to the study of military medicine surgery. The first Army Medical Museum would be on South Beach Street in Washington, D.C. This also housed the library of the Surgeon General. And then the Medical Museum and the library would combine, and they are now the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Silver Springs, Maryland. So you can still see a lot of all this stuff that was sent to the Army Medical Museum. There are other Army Medical Museums out there. I believe there was a large one down in Texas, and some others out there. But we started collecting this stuff, realizing that that was one way we could learn. Circulars was not something that was specifically done by the medical department. It was also done by all the other branches. But circulars were put together, and basically what they were was a form of communicating within the medical department to share knowledge. It would contain updated regulations, things of that nature. During the war, they would just paper versions, and they would be printed up and sent out to the different posts. those four, they would actually be bound into a hardback book. Okay, and I have one here that everybody's welcome to look at. But that was a way that we could put things together to educate and move our medical knowledge forward. A lot of the surgical or the circulars, you can find them online, really interesting reads, if you're into that kind of thing. And then the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. So this was a production or a publication consisting of 6 volumes, issued between 1870 and 1888. It was prepared under the direction of the Surgeon General of the United States Army at the time, Joseph Lawrence. Thousands of case reports and photos, chronological summary of engagements and battles, and statistical summaries, disease, wounds, death. I have the 6 volumes here. Let me tell you, it's some of the most interesting reading I've done in my life. Just going through some of the case reports, it's not often I read material where I have to have a Latin dictionary sitting next to me. But it's available, PDF. I went out, had them all printed up. If you're in the medical field, as a Civil War living historian or reenactor, if you don't have this, you're missing out. That's just my opinion. So I've often been asked who I always thought was the most interesting person in the medical department. Has anybody heard of him?
Nope.
All right, I love this. So Herman Faber, he was born in Germany, emigrated to Philadelphia, and he would be the artist for the United States Medical Department. He drew all the pictures that are in these 6 volumes and most of the pictures that would come out in these circulars. Wow. So he was an artist. This is what they consider to be one of his most famous drawings. That's Lincoln on his deathbed. But he would be the medical illustrator for the Army Medical Museum and the Army Medical Department. And for his work for the Army, he would receive citizenship in the United States. Here's 2 examples of some of his work. I was in this hobby for almost 6 years before I realized that they had a medical illustrator. So it just goes, there's very interesting information out there. So as you can see, and I hope that you learned something that you didn't before. The medical department, this was a administrative view. We didn't talk about amputations and all that stuff. But I hope that I was able to give you a line progression of what the medical department did. We started with low numbers, okay? We continually added staff. We had battles. This didn't work, let's fix it. Okay, we added nurses. We added ambulance corps. We added medical inspectors. We added cadets, all the way up to the end of the war, where we were well over 12,000. And then not only did we do what we needed to do to take care of our soldiers, we created records for history so that we could continue to learn, and we still learn to this day. So I thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. If anybody has any questions, I'll answer them if I know the answer. If I don't, we'll figure it out.
Thank you, Bob.
Oh,
I always have a question, Jason, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Our good friend Troy Hartman, who's written several books, always talks about compare and contrast. I only want to hit one point. A lot of the Southern senior officers had their own personal physicians with them during the war. Anything similar with the Union Army? Okay.
Not that I've ever come across.
Okay.
To this point in my experience, no. Is that information still out there and I haven't uncovered it or haven't heard of it? Possibility, but I've not seen anything like that in the Union Army.
Everything I've read so far, anybody that had a series like Hancock at Gettysburg, Meade had a few injuries early. They went home to their personal physician.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or they would have been taken care of by, what was the surgeon at their brigade or their corps or whoever it was.
Good program. Hey, a lot of new stuff.
I hope you enjoy it. Yes, sir.
post-Civil War, did the Army do the cutbacks as they usually do?
Absolutely. We did the same thing after the American Civil War that we did in all the wars prior to the Civil War. We started closing things down. We weren't staying up on our preparedness level for the next war. Of course, all the volunteers, they want to go, so they're going to go. Some of the buildings that were built as general hospitals would stay as hospitals. A lot of them were eventually knocked down. So we didn't stay, in my opinion, where we should have stayed, but it wasn't as bad as it was previous.
And then the Indian Wars, or the wars against the Native Americans,
Yeah,
politically correct,
yeah. Yeah.
out in the West, what were the posts like out there?
It depends on where the post was. Some were very primitive. Some had brick and mortar buildings as compared to the wall hut. It all depends on where and what was being done there. Across the medical service, it's like that. You'll talk to, or you'll read some research, the surgeon was a butcher. Well, maybe right then and there, maybe he was. But they did read some reports where this surgeon, he was skilled. Less than 10 minutes, he did the amputation, things like that. So you'll see a wide array of just about everything, but I think that goes with the Civil War and whole.
For the medical profession up to that point was nil, wasn't it?
Yes, no germ theory knowledge, no idea what diseases were, bacteria, things of this nature. As we're over here fighting the American Civil War across the pond, they were doing that research. Lister and Snow, Dr. Lister and Dr. Snow were doing some of that research, but it didn't make it over here in time for us. There were isolated cases where some surgeons were doing some of the work that they were doing over in London here, but it wasn't highly looked upon as being favorable by the medical department. As a whole, it wasn't accepted. Yes, sir.
So this was all about the Union Army. If you were to present a whole nother hour, was there a similar story for the South?
Very similar, but a lot slower. A lot slower. A lot of their highly qualified surgeons were part of that number in the beginning of the presentation, 24 that resigned. They were medical school Philadelphia graduates, etc., that went to fight for the Confederacy, and a lot of their medical department would shadow this program, but it was a lot slower. But yeah, they had a lot of the same regulations and the same things. They're certain board ring sash. So on and so on. One big difference is their medication or remedies. The Confederacy was a lot more holistic than in Union Army. Down there, you're going to see a lot of the herbal teas and tinctures and remedies, etc., poultices and things like that, as compared to the Northern. Thank you very much.
If anybody wants to take a look at this, I just asked that you.
Be careful.
Yeah,
Bring it back.
Be very careful.
yes,
Okay.
that one's falling apart on me.
There's a commemorative coin and.
Oh, thank you.
Compensation.
Thank you.
Let's give him another thank you. Hope we get back safe to New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
And a formal furnace in another year or so.
Okay, two things. Next week is Pete Milley. I read word of it. It's about the development of medical during the Civil War. He's been here once before. And also, we do have books in the back for sale. The one book that could be, if you go this way on your right, those are basically, you want them, they're free if you want a donation. The books on the left going out, they're basically hardcover, $3, softcover, $2, magazines, $1. So we do have two Bruce Canton series. We want to sell them in a series. So anybody who's never read Bruce Canton, yeah, those books, even though they're written in the 50s, they're still the standards. They get ready to reprint them again. I believe it's Jerry Gallo's going to be doing it.